He walked into the wrong interview with mud on his boots and a wrinkled resume. But the CEO didn't ask him to leave. She looked at him like she already knew him, like she'd been waiting for this moment. What happened next would change more than just his future. Before we dive into this heartfelt journey, if you enjoy stories about kindness, unexpected second chances, and the quiet power of doing the right thing, don't forget to subscribe. We share meaningful stories that just might stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Let me know if you'd like a version in voiceover style or with a more emotional tone for narration. A single dad applied for the wrong job. But the CEO said, "I never forgot what you did that night." The rain was relentless that morning, hammering down on the cracked windshield of Jake Dawson's aging truck like it held a personal grudge. He wiped a circle clear with the sleeve of his flannel shirt and squinted through the drizzle at the glass and steel high-rise looming ahead. It didn't look like a place that welcomed people like him, but today he had to try. He turned to his daughter in the back seat, still asleep in her car seat, bundled up in an oversized hoodie. Emma stirred her lashes, fluttering, and Jake leaned back to kiss her forehead. "Just 30 minutes, kiddo," he whispered. "I'll be back before your second muffin wears off." He pulled up the hood on his jacket, grabbed the worn manila folder holding his resume, one page mostly oil-stained, and stepped out into the storm. Inside the lobby, the air smelled of citrus polish and confidence. Jake's boots squeaked with each step on the marble floors as he searched for the directory. The board that had once shown floor listings now lay on the floor, knocked over with arrows and labels too soaked to read. He looked up at the empty reception desk. No one in sight. He pulled the crumpled text message from his pocket. "Interview for custodial position, 10 Surudoyem, 17th floor." He jabbed the elevator button and rode up, feeling the distance grow between himself and the life he knew. At floor 17, he stepped out into a narrow hallway where 2 glass doors stood wide open. Inside, a sleek conference room buzzed with tension. Well-dressed men and women sat around a polished walnut table, flipping through portfolios, sipping from tumblers of what was probably cucumber water. Jake hesitated. Then a young woman with a headset stepped out from a side room, her eyes darting toward him. "You're here for the EA interview, right?" she asked, clipboard in hand. "EA." Jake froze. "Executive assistant, I think," so he stammered, unsure. She glanced down at the list, frowned slightly, then motioned. "Have a seat. The CEO will be with you shortly." Jake slid into the only empty chair next to a man in a tailored navy suit who glanced at Jake's faded jeans and let out a soft, judgmental breath through his nose. Jake fumbled with his resume folder, wishing it were at least dry. He shouldn't be here. He was about to get up and walk out when the glass door opened. She entered like the storm had stopped for her. Sharp charcoal suit hair pulled into a low knot, eyes that could stop a room, and they did. Every candidate straightened. Some smiled, others cleared throats. Jake didn't move. He couldn't, because the woman standing at the head of the table, the CEO, was staring straight at him, and she wasn't blinking. Her lips parted barely as if to say something, then closed again. Her knuckles whitened around the folder in her hand. Jake shifted in his seat, confused. Had he offended her? Did she recognize him? But that wasn't possible. She blinked just once, then turned to the room. "Thank you all for coming," she said smoothly, voice polished and practiced. "Before we begin, I'd like to hear from—" She looked straight at Jake. "You. Let's start with you." The man in the navy suit flinched. Jake looked around. "Me?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes," she said. "Tell me why you're here." Jake cleared his throat. Well, I came for a different interview, actually. I think I'm in the wrong room." Nervous chuckles rippled through the group. But the CEO didn't smile. "Then why did you stay?" Jake hesitated, then said, "Because I promised my daughter I'd try every door today, even if it wasn't meant for me." Silence. The navy suit shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Marissa Lynn, though Jake didn't know her name yet, set her folder on the table. "That's a good answer." She looked around at the others. "He came for the wrong job." and he's the only one who said anything real. A few jaws slackened. I'll be conducting individual interviews, she said. Starting with Mr. Dawson, he replied, stunned. Jake Dawson. She gave the smallest nod. Mr. Dawson, if you'll follow me. Jake stood clutching his damp folder like a lifeline and followed her down the hall. He glanced back once to see several candidates staring at him like he'd walked in with a golden ticket. They entered a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows blurred by rain. She closed the door behind them and stood with her back to it, silent. Jake shifted awkwardly. I really am sorry. I must have— Do you remember me? She interrupted, her voice a little softer now. 7 years ago, under a streetlight, a gas station off Highway 22. It was raining. Jake frowned, sifting through the fog of memory. There was a girl sitting on the curb. She continued, her voice trembling, just slightly. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She thought no one would notice if she disappeared. But then a man stopped. He gave her his only coat. He didn't ask her name. He just said— Jake's lips moved without thinking. Don't return it. Just pass it forward someday. She exhaled sharply as if she'd been holding her breath for years. Jake stared. That was you. Marissa nodded. Her eyes glistened now, but her expression held firm. I never forgot what you did that night, she said. And I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Dawson. I believe in doors that open exactly when they're supposed to. She walked to her desk, picked up a file, and turned back to him. I'd like you to work with us. Not as an executive assistant. She smiled faintly. That would be cruel. But there's a community outreach project I think you're meant for. Jake blinked, stunned. I don't know anything about outreach, he said. She looked him in the eye. You don't have to. You already saved one life by showing up. Let's see what happens when you show up for more. Jake swallowed hard, and for the first time in a long time he felt the storm outside begin to ease. She was cold, wet, and invisible. That night, 7 years ago, the rain had come down like judgment. Heavy, unforgiving. The kind that soaked through even the thickest resolve. Marissa Lynn sat beneath a flickering streetlight behind a half-abandoned gas station just off Highway 22, her knees pulled to her chest, her backpack hugged tight like a shield. Her coat, stolen the day before while she napped at the city shelter, had been her last layer of protection, literally and emotionally. Now, all she had left was the ache in her stomach and the echo of her own voice from earlier that day. I'm fine. She wasn't. Not by a long stretch. At 27, with a psychology degree, she couldn't afford to finish No Family, No Friends left from the foster system and a job lost after one sick day. Too many Marissa had become what she feared most disposable. And that night she wasn't planning on seeing another sunrise. The air smelled of diesel and stale sugar. Somewhere in the distance a truck roared past without slowing. The world had no idea she was here and even less interest in finding out. Then headlights. They pierced the storm like a miracle or a warning. A rusted old truck slowed near the curb. Marissa tensed, ready to run. But she didn't. She didn't have the energy. Or maybe she didn't care anymore. The engine cut. A man stepped out. She remembered the sound of his boots, first scuffed heavy familiar somehow. Not the calculated click of someone about to lecture her, not the lazy stomp of a drunk. Just footsteps. Real ones. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt beneath a damp utility jacket. No umbrella, no badge, no question. Evenin', he said gently, hands in pockets, not moving closer. Didn't mean to startle you. Marissa looked up but said nothing. He was maybe in his early 30s. Blue eyes under a cap, pulled low with a voice that didn't ask anything of her. You need help, he asked after a beat. Not like a cop, not like a preacher, like a person. No, she croaked. He nodded like that was fair, then started walking back toward his truck. But halfway there he paused, removed his jacket, walked back and held it out. It's not new, but it's warm. She blinked up at him. I'm not some charity case. No, he said softly. You're someone sitting in the rain." She hesitated. She wanted to say no, wanted to cling to some form of pride, but her body betrayed her, shivering hard enough that her teeth clicked. She reached out, barely touching the fabric, expecting him to let go. He didn't. "Don't give it back," he said. "Just pass it forward. Someday." Her grip tightened, and just like that he let go and turned away. She stared after him, stunned. "Wait," she called almost involuntarily. "What's your name?" He opened his truck door but didn't get in. Over his shoulder he answered Jake. And then he was gone, swallowed by rain and night. She wore that jacket for the next 2 years. Even after she'd found a job, even when she'd moved into a basement room with heat, even as she began to rebuild her life piece by piece, it was always with her. Not because she needed it, but because it reminded her of something she'd nearly lost forever. Hope. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that came with speeches or banners, but the kind that showed up quietly, handed you a coat, and didn't ask for anything in return. Back in the present, Marissa stood in her office staring out into the rain that mirrored the one in her memory. But this storm felt different now. Jake Dawson was back in her life, and he had no idea what he'd done for her that night. She still remembered the weight of his coat on her shoulders, the warmth, the dignity he gave her by not asking what she was doing out there, by not judging, by not offering advice or pity. That coat had made her feel seen. And now, 7 years later, he stood in her boardroom thinking he was there for a janitor's job, completely unaware that he had been the turning point in someone else's story. Marissa moved to her bookshelf, opened a small cedar box, and pulled out the coat. It was still there, worn a little torn at the sleeve, but folded neatly, preserved like a relic. She pressed her fingers into the fabric and closed her eyes. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was responsibility. She had built an empire of mental health support tools, a tech platform that connected struggling individuals with counselors and peer resources now used in 5 states and backed by major investors. But none would have happened if a mechanic hadn't stopped in the rain that night and offered her something more than warmth. Humanity. And now that same man was here trying to find work to support his little girl. She saw the frayed cuffs of his shirt, the quiet desperation in his eyes, the kind that can't be faked. The same eyes that had looked at her back then with no judgment, no agenda, just kindness. She wouldn't let the world pass him by the way it had almost passed her. Downstairs, Jake waited in the building cafe, a free coffee in hand. He hadn't asked for feeling out of place. Still unsure why the CEO herself had asked to see him. Still wondering if this was all some kind of cosmic mix-up. He looked out at the rain, his fingers tightening around the cup. Emma's face flashed through his mind, her sleepy smile that morning, the way she'd said, "You can do it, Daddy," like it was a magic spell. He had to find something. Anything. For her. But something about the woman upstairs had stirred something deep in him. The look in her eyes. Like she wasn't seeing a stranger. Like she was remembering something. He just couldn't figure out what. Not yet. But the storm both outside and within was far from over. The storm had eased by the time Jake stepped into the elevator again, but something inside him still churned like thunderclouds over open plains. He clutched the lukewarm coffee cup, though he hadn't taken more than a sip. His hands were too busy with nerves. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. Not on this floor, not in a glass tower filled with digital wizards and polished people who wore confidence like armor. He was a grease-stained mechanic with a rusted truck, a single resume, and a daughter who still thought he could fix anything. The elevator doors opened to the executive level where Marissa Lynn was already waiting. "Hope you like elevators," she said, a wry smile touching her lips. Jake chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether he was being welcomed or escorted out. "I figured I'd be on my way by now." Marissa nodded toward the corridor. "Come walk with me." They passed open offices, people speaking in hushed tones over headsets, glowing monitors reflecting in glass. Jake tried not to glance too long at any one place. He felt like a man drifting through someone else's dream. Finally, they entered a quieter room, still elegant but warmer. Wood panels, indoor plants, a long table littered with folders, mood boards, and sticky notes. A whiteboard bore the words Community Outreach, Winter Initiative. "This is where I think you belong," Marissa said simply. Jake blinked. "You want me to help with this? I want you to lead it." He nearly dropped the coffee. "Lead," he echoed. "Ma'am, I'm Marissa," she corrected gently. "And yes, I'm not asking you to pitch to venture capitalists or write code. I'm asking you to do what you did for me, show up for people who feel invisible. That's the whole idea behind this program. Real help, real warmth. No speeches, no cameras, just action." Jake exhaled slowly, trying to grasp the sheer scale of the offer. "I'm a mechanic, a single dad. I've never led anything bigger than a school fundraiser." Marissa moved closer, her gaze steady. "That's exactly why I'm asking. You're not here because of a degree. You're here because in a moment when you had nothing to gain, you gave something that changed my life. I want that kind of character on this project." Jake fell silent, not out of modesty, but because something in her voice made him believe she meant it. "But I don't even know what this is," he said after a moment, gesturing at the table. Marissa reached for a folder and opened it. "We're launching a winter outreach program, partnerships with shelters, pop-up aid centers, volunteer-run kitchens. But we need someone on the ground who understands people. Someone who listens more than they talk. Someone who's lived it." Jake looked down at a flyer mock-up titled The Warmth Line 1 Coat. One story. One life. Something caught in his chest. "I get paid for this." Marissa smiled. "More than a custodian would. Less than a CEO, but enough to help your daughter sleep warm and eat better than vending machine crackers." Jake laughed and, to his own surprise, felt his eyes sting. "I don't know if I'm the right guy for this," he said, "but I want to try." She offered her hand. "That's all I need." Their handshake was firm. Real. No pretense. Just then, the door opened and a young man with thick glasses and a tech hoodie stepped in. "Sorry, Marissa. The system update crashed on floor 5. We lost the email logs and—" He froze when he saw Jake. "Oh," he said, trying to cover. "Didn't know you had someone with you." Marissa nodded. "This is Jake Dawson. He'll be heading the Winter Initiative." The man gave a tight smile, clearly uncertain. Jake extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." The man hesitated, but eventually shook it. "Kyle, Data Systems. Good luck with whatever this is." When Kyle left, Jake scratched his neck. "I think I just got my first polite brush off." Marissa laughed. "Give it time. Half of them don't know how to talk to people unless it's in code." Jake grinned. "I guess I speak an older language. Exactly why we need you." That afternoon, Jake stayed to meet the team he'd be working with. It was eclectic. A fiery single mom named Trina who handled logistics and drove a battered minivan with stickers that read, "Coffee first, humanity second." Luis, a soft-spoken first-generation college grad whose resume outshone his confidence by a mile and who typed faster than he spoke. And Zane, a re-entry program hire with a tough exterior and a history of bad decisions, as he put it, but sharp instincts and a deeply buried heart. None of them looked like traditional nonprofit professionals. None wore suits. And none of them seemed particularly thrilled to be reporting to Jake. "We've had 3 leads in 2 months, Trina said flatly. "One forgot our names, one stole grant money, and one cried and never came back." Jake took that in with a nod. "Well," he said, "I've never led a team like this, and I don't know how half of these forms work. But I do know what it's like to be cold, and scared, and ignored. So if you'll bear with me while I figure this out, I promise I'll never forget your names. I won't steal anything, and if I cry, it'll be after hours." There was a pause. Then Trina cracked a grin. Luis chuckled. Zane rolled his eyes but stayed. They didn't say, "Welcome aboard," but no one walked out. For Jake, that was enough. That night, back at the small apartment, Emma was already in pajamas coloring under a blanket when Jake returned. "Did you get the job?" she asked. He knelt beside her, kissed her head, and whispered, "I got something even better." She beamed. "You're gonna fix stuff again." He smiled. "Yeah, just in a different way this time." She didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But Jake did. And for the first time in years, he felt like maybe he was starting to find his way back to something that mattered. Something bigger than survival. Something closer to purpose. Jake stood at the end of the long folding table staring down at a whiteboard smeared with half-erased plans marker caps missing coffee rings staining the edges. The meeting room had no windows and smelled faintly of dry erase ink and old pizza, but to him it felt like stepping into a garage before the first spark. Raw, messy, full of possibility. Across from him sat his new team Trina, Luis, and Zane. 3 pairs of eyes, 3 layers of guarded skepticism. 3 people who, like him, weren't supposed to belong in a building like this. So Jake began, his voice steady but casual. "I figure we start with what doesn't work." Luis raised an eyebrow. "Everything." Jake cracked a smile. "Fair point. Let's be more specific. Why did the last 3 leads fail?" Trina leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Because they either talked too much, cared too little, or panicked the moment things got hard. Luis added, and one of them used team building as an excuse to read us poems about clouds. Zane grunted. He lasted 6 days. Jake nodded slowly. "Okay, no poetry. Got it." The corner of Trina's mouth twitched. He took a step closer to the table. "I'm not here to pretend I know more than you. I don't. I've never run a community initiative. I'm a mechanic. I know how to fix engines and pack school lunches. But I've been broke scared and overlooked. And I know what it's like to need a hand and get a lecture instead." The room stayed quiet, but something softened almost imperceptibly. Jake gestured to the board. "We've got 4 weeks to launch this thing. The warmth line. That means we need coat drives, distribution centers, pop-up shelters, and volunteers who won't vanish when it gets cold." Luis tilted his head. "You want us to start from scratch?" Jake shook his head. "No, I want us to start from real. What's already working out there? Who's already doing good and getting ignored?" Trina finally uncrossed her arms. "I know a guy in East Portland who runs a food truck that feeds homeless vets. Doesn't advertise, doesn't ask questions. He just shows up." "Perfect," Jake said. "Let's visit him." Zane spoke up, his voice rough. "There's a barber near Columbia Park. Cuts hair for free on Sundays. Used to be inside himself, says clean hair changes how a man sees his own reflection." Jake's eyes lit up. "That's what I'm talking about." He grabbed a marker and scribbled names on the board, the letters shaky but full of momentum. For the first time in a long time, he felt the current of something powerful moving through his chest. Not adrenaline, not fear, hope. That afternoon, they piled into Trina's dented minivan 3 busted seatbelts, a toy dinosaur under the passenger seat, and a dashboard that blinked "check engine" every 10 seconds. "Irony," Jake muttered, patting the wheel. Trina snorted. "She may be ugly, but she's loyal." They drove through neighborhoods often left off planning maps. Streets without sidewalks, houses with boarded windows, community centers running on donations and grit. Luis took notes in the back, tapping away on his laptop, while Zane rode shotgun eyes alert beneath his hood. Their first stop, the food truck. The man running it, a veteran named Hank, served chili out of a retrofitted school bus with fading camo paint and a makeshift sign. "No questions, just food." Jake shook his hand. "We're not from the city. We're not here to regulate anything. We just want to help." Hank studied him. "That right?" Jake nodded. "We've got funding, blankets, a growing team, but we need folks who already know the people." Hank scooped another ladle of chili into a dented bowl, handed it to a teen with no shoes, then looked back at Jake. "You show up again next week, maybe I'll believe you." Jake smiled. "Fair enough." Next stopped the barber, a soft-spoken man named Darren with tired eyes and hands like carved wood. His tiny shop doubled as a safe space. The walls were covered in Polaroid smiling men with fresh cuts and a little more dignity than they walked in with. Jake watched as Darren handed a mirror to a middle-aged man who looked like he hadn't seen his own face in weeks. "Still got it," the man whispered. That one sentence hit Jake in the ribs. Back in the van, Jake exhaled hard. "We're not building a project," he said. "We're building a bridge." Zane gave a rare nod of agreement. "Let's just make sure we don't burn it once it's done." That evening, as twilight bled into cold, Jake stood with Trina outside a church-turned shelter they hoped to partner with. She lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. "You're different," she said without looking at him. Jake raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You actually listen. That's rare around here. Most people want to fix things so they can feel good. You just want people to feel human." Jake leaned against the brick wall. "I wasn't always like that." Trina glanced over. He smiled faintly. "Took losing a lot to realize how much people matter, especially the ones nobody sees." She flicked ash to the ground, then looked at him fully. "You're going to burn out if you try to carry everyone." Jake shook his head. "I'm not carrying anyone. I'm just opening the door." They stood in silence for a while. Finally, Trina said, "You know this whole thing's probably going to get messy." "Absolutely," Jake replied. "But at least we're going to make a beautiful mess." Back at home, Emma greeted him with 2 questions. "Did you make any friends, and can we have pancakes for dinner?" Jake scooped her up laughing. "Yes, to both." As he flipped pancakes in their small kitchen, Jake felt something shift. Not in the world, but in himself. He wasn't the right man for this job on paper. But for the first time, he didn't need paper to prove anything. He had a team. He had a purpose. And maybe he was exactly where he was meant to be. The rain came back just as fast as it had left. Jake pressed his forehead to the cool glass of the apartment window, watching rivulets race down like they were in a hurry to hit bottom. Outside, the streets shimmered under sodium lights. Inside, the air was too still, too quiet. Emma's soft breathing from the next room was the only sign that this place was still a home. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Between endless planning meetings, driving to every corner of the city for partnerships, and helping Emma finish her school project about migratory birds, he was running on caffeine willpower and a prayer he wasn't sure anyone was listening to. His phone buzzed. "Trina, urgent. Budget got cut. Check email." Jake sat down hard on the edge of the couch, pulled open his inbox. He scrolled past auto notifications, grant proposals, Luis's 4th revision of the volunteer manual, then found it, subject internal budget reallocation. Immediate adjustments required. The email was clear and brutal. Due to a last-minute reshuffling of Q4 resources, the Winter Outreach Initiative's funding had been slashed by 40%. That meant fewer blankets, fewer meals, fewer people helped, and a lot more explaining to do. He rubbed a hand down his face, let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck for years. The real storm wasn't outside. It was this. How do you tell people who finally trusted something good that it might not happen after all? The next morning, Jake stood in front of the whiteboard again. His team sat in silence. Luis looked pale. Trina had both arms crossed tightly, her jaw set. Zane was chewing a pen like it owed him money. "We lost 40%, Jake said plainly. "No warning, no appeal process, just gone. No one said anything." "We can't deliver what we promised," Luis muttered. "We'll be a joke." "No," Jake replied. "We won't be a joke, but we'll have to rethink everything." Trina scoffed. "We were already operating on duct tape and favors." "What now? Hug people." Until they feel warm, Jake paused, then walked up to the board. With the red marker, he drew a single word in the center: trust. He turned back to them. "People didn't say yes to us because of budgets. They said yes because they believed we saw them. Because we weren't trying to fix them, we were walking beside them." Luis frowned. "But without coats, without supplies, what are we actually giving?" Jake tapped the word. "This." Zane finally spoke. You want us to go out there and tell people their lifeline got pulled, but we'll smile about it." Jake shook his head. "I want us to tell them the truth, and then I want us to ask what they need. Maybe it's not 500 coats. Maybe it's 2 reliable vans, or 10 portable heaters. Maybe it's just showing up no matter what." Trina looked at him, voice quieter now. "You're really going to go out there and say that?" Jake nodded. "Today." She picked up her coat. "Then I'm going with you." They started with the food truck. Hank was stirring a vat of lentil soup, his breath visible in the morning air. Jake explained the cutbacks. Hank didn't flinch. "I figured that might happen," he said, ladling soup into biodegradable cups. "That's why I didn't say yes for the blankets. I said yes because no one else came out here and asked." Jake's throat tightened. "So, you'll still be part of this." Hank looked up. "You still coming next week?" "Yeah, then we're still in business." At the barber shop, Darren paused mid-fade to hear the news. Then he shrugged. "You know, what doesn't cost a thing," he said, trimming around a man's ears. "Listening, smiling, making someone feel like they're worth a clean cut." Jake smiled. "We'll bring the coffee. You bring the clippers." Back at the office, the team regrouped. Zane looked less tense. Luis had already built a spreadsheet titled Impact with $0, and Trina had posted a new community call-out on social media. No fancy campaign. No big money. Just people showing up. Join us. Within 2 hours, over 50 volunteers had signed up. Some offered time. Some brought supplies. One woman messaged, "I knit scarves. I'm not fast, but I don't stop." Jake couldn't stop smiling. They weren't losing momentum. They were gaining movement. That night, Jake got home to find Emma curled on the couch, flushed and glassy-eyed. "Hey, kiddo." He crouched down beside her, touched her forehead. "Too warm." Emma tried to sit up. "I'm okay, Daddy." "No, you're not," he murmured. "We'll fix it." He called the on-call nurse. Clinic closed. Emergency room meant long hours and a bill he couldn't afford. He opened the medicine cabinet. One children's fever reducer left, expired. He stared at the bottle rage and helplessness swirling inside him. He had been so focused on helping the city he forgot how close he still lived to the edge. And Emma, his everything, was paying the price. He didn't sleep that night. He sat beside her with a wet cloth and cold compresses, whispering stories about brave girls and gentle dragons, and how sometimes even knights needed help, too. When her breathing finally slowed, he opened his wallet. 2 20s, a 5. That was it. The last of his savings had gone to buying supplies for their outreach teams. He'd told no one, not even Marissa, because it had felt right. Good. Now, he wasn't sure anymore. Morning came gray and unforgiving. Jake stood in the kitchen waiting for the kettle to boil, eyes hollow. Then a knock at the door. He opened it to find Trina holding a brown bag. Louise said, "You left early yesterday," she said. "Brought soup." Jake tried to thank her, but emotion closed his throat. Trina looked past him and saw Emma asleep on the couch, a blanket up to her chin. She said nothing, just stepped forward, set the bag down, and pulled out a bottle of children's Tylenol. Jake blinked. "How did you—" "I'm a mom," she said. "We noticed the signs." Then she looked him square in the eye. "Next time, ask for help. You don't need to be the hero every hour of the day." Jake swallowed hard, nodded, because right then in the quiet of that tiny apartment he realized something profound. The warmth he'd been trying to give to the city had already found its way back to him. The city was wrapped in fog that morning, soft and heavy like a memory. Marissa stood in the quiet of her private office, the soundproof walls blocking out the hum of emails, meetings, and polite chaos beyond the glass. In her hands, she held something that didn't belong to the world she now commanded. A coat, frayed at the cuffs, zipper a little stubborn. The color, once a deep brown, had faded to something closer to warmth than pigment. Folded neatly in her cedar-lined keepsake box, the coat smelled faintly of old denim and winter air. She hadn't touched it in years. Not because she forgot, but because some things are too sacred for everyday handling. Yet now, with Jake Dawson back in her orbit, the coat seemed to radiate through the wood like a heartbeat she hadn't noticed in years. She laid it gently on the conference table, running her fingers over the stitching. 7 years. 7 long years since the night she nearly disappeared. Not in the literal sense, but in the deeper, quieter way that people vanish when no one sees them, when no one speaks their name. That night she had sat under the flickering streetlight with soaked jeans, an empty stomach, and a soul that no longer believed in doors that opened. Until a stranger walked up and offered her warmth. No strings, no name, no sermon. Just the words that had burrowed into her chest and stayed there. Don't return it. Just pass it forward someday. She had lived those words every day since. The company she built. The programs they launched. Every anonymous scholarship, every emergency shelter, every late-night text line for someone who didn't want to face morning. It all began with that coat. And the man who'd given it without hesitation now sat 3 floors below, leading a team with zero ego and infinite heart. Jake still didn't know what he'd done for her. Not really. And part of her wondered, when is the right moment to tell someone they saved your life without ever knowing they held it in their hands? Downstairs, the team was buzzing. Trina was fielding calls from volunteers. Luis was organizing new inventory donations that had somehow tripled overnight. Zane, surprisingly, was building makeshift shelving in the basement for winter gear with the quiet focus of a man who never wasted movement. And Jake. He was hunched over a folding table helping a shy high schooler write her name badge. She wanted to volunteer but was scared of speaking in public. Jake sat beside her talking in soft tones, letting her take her time. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just was. And people bloomed near him because of that. Marissa watched from the hallway, the coat folded in her arms. She hesitated, then stepped back before he could see her. Not yet. She needed him to see it through her, not for her. Later that day, Jake found a package on his desk wrapped in simple brown paper. No card, no note. Inside was the coat. The same coat he'd forgotten ever owning. The stitching was still loose on the left sleeve where he'd caught it years ago fixing a stranger's engine. His breath caught. He turned it over in his hand slowly as if memory might spill out of the lining. Emma's voice echoed in his mind from the night before. "Daddy, you're gonna fix stuff again." He smiled faintly. Maybe that included the parts of himself he thought had worn too thin. That evening, Jake met Marissa in the company's small cafe just as she was finishing a call. She looked up, saw the coat over his arm, and smiled. "You kept it," he said softly. She nodded. "Of course. I didn't even know I'd given you something that mattered." Marissa looked at him, eyes clear but full. "That's the thing about real kindness, Jake. It matters especially when you don't know it does." He sat down across from her. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" he asked. When we first met again, she hesitated. "Because I wanted you to show me who you are now, not just who you were that night." Jake tilted his head. "And you're still him," she said. "But more. You're the man who gave away his only coat to a stranger, and then showed up years later to lead a movement without even realizing he already had." The weight of her words settled between them like something sacred. Jake let out a breath. That night, I remember thinking, I can't fix her life, but maybe I can fix that moment for her. "You did," she said, "and now you're helping fix 100 more." He looked down at the coat. "I didn't know it still had a job to do." Marissa leaned forward. "It's not the coat, Jake. It's the man who gave it. And the fact that you're still doing it one moment at a time." There was silence between them, not awkward, but full. And in that stillness something shifted. Not just gratitude, not just admiration, but something that might one day become love. That night, Jake returned home and found Emma sitting on the floor with construction paper and scissors. "What are you working on?" he asked, crouching beside her. "It's a storybook," she said. "About you." Jake blinked. "Me." She nodded. "It's called The Man Who Gives His Coat Away. He swallowed hard. Sounds like a good man. Emma grinned. He is, and at the end he gets lots of coats back, but he only keeps one. Which one? She looked up, the one that made someone else want to be kind too. Jake pulled her into a hug, the coat still folded on the armchair behind them. It had done its job once, and now through his daughter in this city and maybe even through Marissa it was doing it again. The text came just after sunrise. Trina, you need to get down here, now. It's bad. Jake bolted upright, heart already pounding before his feet hit the floor. He moved on instinct, shoes, coat keys, a whispered kiss to Emma's forehead, and was out the door within 5 minutes. By the time he pulled into the underground parking at headquarters, his stomach was in knots. Rain flecked his windshield like static. The elevator ride felt endless. He walked into chaos. The project room looked like a storm had passed through. Chairs, overturned folders, scattered Trina pacing with a face like stone. Luis sat at the edge of the table, eyes wide with disbelief, a paper trembling in his hand. Zane stood against the wall, arms folded, jaw tight. "What happened?" Jake asked. Trina handed him the document. Read it. Jake scanned the first few lines and felt the ground shift beneath him. Formal complaint of financial mismanagement. Winter Outreach Project. He blinked. What the apparently Luis said. Voice strained, someone submitted an internal report claiming we misused funds, purchased unauthorized supplies, distributed resources to unverified recipients, and lacked basic documentation. Jake looked up. That's not true. Every item was logged. Every name Trina cut in. Doesn't matter. They submitted the complaint to legal and finance. HR flagged it. Until it's investigated, all activity is frozen. All activity, Jake's voice cracked. Zane nodded once. No vans, no volunteers, no distribution, nothing. Jake gripped the edge of the table. Who filed this? Luis hesitated. We're not supposed to know, but the document ID traces back to Kyle. Jake blinked. The systems guy, Luis, nodded. He's been skeptical since day one. Probably thinks we're amateurs playing non-profit. Jake stepped back, running a hand through his hair. We are amateurs, but we've done more in 3 weeks than most programs do in a year. Trina's voice dropped. And that might be the problem. They all knew it. They'd built something real, visible, powerful, and not everyone liked that. Later that morning, Jake stood in front of a long conference table in legal's corner suite, a stark room with glass walls and cold lighting. Marissa wasn't there. She was reportedly in a board meeting with investors. Jake stood alone, facing 2 members of legal and 1 from compliance. They asked questions with clipped precision. Were you aware you purchased space heaters outside the approved vendor list? Did you allow volunteers to distribute goods without background checks? Why were coats given out without a signed intake form? Jake answered every question truthfully. Yes, he bought heaters on sale because the approved vendor cost double. Yes, he allowed trusted volunteers to distribute supplies in person. No, he didn't get a signature from a woman carrying a toddler with frostbitten fingers. The room fell quiet. Finally, one of them said, "We understand your intentions, Mr. Dawson, but intentions aren't policy." Jake leaned forward. Tell that to the people sleeping under bridges tonight. He didn't wait for a response. He walked out unsure whether he'd still have a badge by the end of the day. Upstairs, Marissa burst into the hallway as soon as she got the message. Why didn't someone tell me sooner? She snapped, already moving. Trina met her by the elevator. We tried. You were locked in with board reps. Marissa turned on her heel, eyes flashing. They're freezing the program. They froze, Jake Trina said. Same thing. Marissa pressed the elevator button. Not for long. Jake stood in the rooftop garden and overlooked a space on the 21st floor that he'd found during his first week. A place to breathe when the weight of the world grew too heavy. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. He thought about Emma's drawing, the man who gives his coat away. Would he have to explain to her tonight why the man got fired? The door behind him opened. I should have been there. He turned. Marissa stood a few steps away, wind catching her hair, her heels silent on the wet tiles. You couldn't have known, Jake said quietly. I should have, she insisted. You were out there doing the work we built this company to support, and they tried to punish you for caring too much. He looked down. Policy doesn't care about kindness. She took a step closer. Then we changed the policy. Jake lifted his eyes to hers. You'd fight for this, I already am. A pause. Then Jake said, if I walk away, they move on. But if you fight, this whole company shifts. Marissa's voice softened. Then don't walk away yet. Give me 24 hours. He nodded. All right. She started to go, then paused. Jake. Yeah. She hesitated. Do you regret it, giving that coat away? He gave a tired smile. Every day I thought I'd never get it back. She blinked. Jake shrugged. But now, I think maybe it was never meant to come back. Maybe it was meant to keep going. He turned toward the city below, lights blinking through the drizzle. And for the first time since the complaint hit, he didn't feel alone. That night, Jake returned home bone-tired but lighter somehow. Emma ran up to him in her socks. Did you help someone today? He scooped her into his arms. I tried. She giggled. Then you win. Jake held her close, and even though everything felt like it was breaking, he realized something quietly profound. Sometimes when things fall apart, it's just the space being made for something stronger to rise. The boardroom had never been this silent. Not during acquisitions, not during market crises, not even when their first investor pulled out at the 11th hour 5 years ago. But now, as Marissa Lynn stood at the head of the Obsidian conference table facing 12 of the most influential voices in the company, you could hear the faint tick of her watch echo against glass walls. She wasn't supposed to be here today, not in this room. But she'd called the emergency session herself. Across the room sat Kyle, arms folded, his face blank, though his foot tapped nervously beneath the table. Legal sat adjacent, papers neatly stacked. The head of finance looked like she regretted showing up without coffee. I called this meeting to address the allegations brought against Jake Dawson. Marissa began, voice clear, calm. And more importantly, to address what those allegations say about us. A few board members shifted in their seats. Mr. Dawson, she continued, was accused of financial mismanagement, of procedural shortcuts, of acting without full documentation. She paused. Every single one of those claims is factually true. Kyle sat up straight, her eyes flicking to his notes, but Marissa added context matters. And I think it's time you hear the full story, not through filtered emails or department memos, but from me. She took a breath, and then she told them about the night 7 years ago, about the coat, about the man who gave it to her without knowing her name, without expecting anything in return, about how she'd sat under a streetlight ready to disappear, and how that moment of kindness pulled her back from the edge. She didn't cry. She didn't dramatize. She just told the truth, and the room fell into reverent stillness. When I built this company, she said, I swore we'd never become one of those firms, the kind that turns human suffering into numbers, the kind that gives TED Talks about compassion while ignoring the cold outside their own walls. She looked around, her gaze firm but pleading. Jake didn't misuse resources. He used them for exactly what they were meant, for saving lives. A pause. Then she turned to Kyle. I understand your concerns, she said. You followed procedure. But if this company punishes people like Jake for acting out of empathy, then we've already failed. Not legally, but morally. Kyle looked down. One of the older board members, a silver-haired woman named Evelyn Garrison, cleared her throat. I lost my husband to the cold, she said quietly. He was a veteran, slipped through every crack in the system. The room turned to her. If someone like Jake had been there, Evelyn continued, maybe I wouldn't have spent the last Christmas identifying him through a necklace chain. Her voice trembled. We need more people like him. A silence followed, heavier than judgment, truer than policy. And then, one by one, the board members began nodding. The head of finance folded her hands. "We'll reinstate the funding and update protocol to allow emergency discretionary spending with proper after-action documentation." Legal added, "The complaint will be expunged. No record, no delay." Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it again. Marissa nodded once. "Thank you." She stood straighter. "And one more thing. Starting immediately, I'll be stepping down from my day-to-day CEO duties and appointing a director of community engagement to sit on this board permanently." Gasps, murmurs. Even Evelyn looked surprised. Marissa turned toward the door. Jake stepped in, eyes wide, posture uncertain. He had no idea what room he'd just walked into, until Marissa said, "Jake Dawson. Would you consider taking the role Silence again, but this time electric?" Jake blinked. "You want me on the board." "You've already been leading Hearts," Marissa said gently. "Now I want you helping lead Direction." Jake looked around. These weren't his people. They wore suits worth more than his truck. They used words like scalability and Q1 forecasting. But then he thought about Emma, about the kids they'd helped, about Trina and Luis and Zane showing up every single day. He thought about the coat, and the moment under the streetlight. "I'm not a businessman," he said. "Good," Evelyn replied. "We've got plenty of those." Jake smiled. "All right," he said, "let's do some good." Later that day, as the reinstated team returned to the office, Trina rushed in first, waving a paper in the air. "We're back." Baby Luis followed behind, grinning. "Got 6 new volunteers already queued up. Word spreading like wildfire." Zane gave Jake a subtle nod from the corner. "Heard you made it upstairs." Jake chuckled. "I didn't mean to." Trina clapped him on the back. "That's the only way it ever works." That evening, Marissa found Jake on the rooftop again, leaning against the railing. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I keep thinking how close I came to walking away. If you hadn't stepped in—" "You did walk away," she interrupted, "for the right reasons. But you came back. That's what matters." Jake turned toward her. "You didn't have to fight for me." "Yes," she said, stepping closer, "I did." A long pause. Then she added, voice softer now. "You saved my life, and today you helped me save something bigger than both of us." Their eyes met. The wind lifted her hair. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze. And in that still moment beneath the clouds above the city, something passed between them. Not just gratitude, not obligation, but trust. Real, quiet, undeniable. Down below, the lights of the Warmth Line office flickered on again. And the city, cold as ever, broken as always, felt just a little more human. The first snow of the season arrived quietly. It fell in hushed flurries, drifting past the windows of the outreach center like feathers from a sky that had finally taken a breath. Inside, the old project room buzzed with new energy. Folding tables had been replaced by solid desks. Luis had upgraded the inventory system, complete with barcodes and a functioning tablet check-in. Zane had mounted wall shelves built by hand. And Trina had created a thank you wall filled with Polaroids from the field kids in new coats, veterans holding hot meals, strangers hugging near fire barrels. It was no longer just a project. It was a movement. And Jake stood in the center of it all as if the room had grown around him. He didn't speak much that morning. He didn't have to. He just moved through the space like someone who had finally found home, not the kind with a mortgage, but the kind built from purpose. Marissa watched him from the doorway. There was something different in his expression lately. Less strain in his brow, less weight behind his shoulders. The man who had once sat in a mismatched chair holding a water-stained resume now walked like someone who knew his worth and used it for others. And yet a quiet uncertainty still lingered beneath his steady calm. Marissa stepped in. "Busy morning," she said. Jake turned, offered her a small smile. "It's finally working. Feels like the engine's running smooth." Marissa tilted her head. "Which is why I need to talk to you." He froze just slightly. She stepped closer and held out a folder. Thick, formal, his name typed across the front in bold lettering. Jake took it brows-knitting. "What is this, a permanent contract?" she said. "For the Director of Community Engagement, full benefits, salary, autonomy, and a seat at the table on your terms." Jake opened it, scanned the offer, then looked back at her. "This is real?" he asked, as if the weight of the folder wasn't already answering that question. Marissa smiled. "As real as that coat you gave me." Jake laughed once, quiet, almost breathless. "You're not afraid I'll screw it up?" "I hope you screw it up," she said. "It means you're human. It means you're trying. The people who terrify me are the ones who think they can't." Jake looked down at the contract again. He thought about his daughter, about bills paid just in time, about emergency rooms he couldn't afford. He thought about the men and women they'd met, people who taught him more about resilience than any manual or board meeting ever could. "I've never led anything this big," he said. "Not long term." Marissa's voice lowered. "But you already have." He met her eyes. "Why me?" She didn't flinch. "Because you remember what it's like to be cold. And because you show up anyway." Silence settled between them. Then Jake said, "Okay, but I have conditions." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I want Luis promoted. He's running circles around most managers in this building." "Done. I want Trina on payroll with childcare coverage, already in motion. And Zane, he wants to get certified for youth mentorship. I want us to cover it." Marissa smiled. "You're negotiating for your team before yourself." Jake shrugged. "They're the reason any of this works." She extended a hand. "Welcome aboard, Director Dawson." He shook it, firm and steady. No pretense, no performance, just promise. That afternoon, Jake picked Emma up early from school. She came running across the playground, cheeks flushed, pink backpack bouncing. "Daddy?" He scooped her into his arms, her joy warming him more than any jacket ever could. "I have a surprise," he said. She gasped. "Ice cream? Better." She frowned. "Pancakes." He laughed. "Even better." He reached into his coat and pulled out the nameplate, Jake Dawson, Director Community Engagement. Emma's eyes lit up. "You got promoted." Jake knelt down. "I got planted." She tilted her head. "What's that mean?" "It means someone believed in me. Enough to help me grow." She thought about that for a second, then smiled. "Then you'll grow big like the library tree." He nodded. "Exactly like that." That evening they sat together on the living room floor, surrounded by coloring books and coat donation flyers. Emma was designing her own version of the Warmth Line logo, a giant heart made of mittens. Jake was filling out forms he still didn't fully understand, but now had people to ask. The heater rattled softly. Outside, the snow kept falling, and inside, something more enduring took root. A man, a daughter, a coat, a city being stitched back together by kindness, one life at a time. Later that night, Jake received a message from Hank, the food truck veteran. "Hank, first snow's always the hardest. We got through the day. Had enough chili for everyone. That's your win, too." Jake stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Jake, it's all of ours now." He looked across the room at Emma, already curled beneath a quilt, one hand still holding a crayon in her sleep. He walked to the armchair, sat down slowly, and unfolded the coat that started it all. And for a moment, he just held it. Not as a symbol of where he'd been, but as a reminder of where he was now. Home, not because he had arrived, but because he had finally decided to stay. The community center gymnasium had never been this full. The echo of laughter-soft guitar music, the clink of mugs, and the rustle of winter coats filled the converted space like a living heartbeat. Above the entrance hung a banner stitched together by a dozen hands. The Warmth Line. One coat. One story. One life. It was launch day. And Jake stood near the entrance in his pressed flannel and name badge, watching something he once thought impossible unfold before him. Volunteers lined the walls with folding tables, each labeled with the simple word, coats, meals, blankets, conversations. Yes, conversations. Luis's idea, and a good one. Because sometimes Luis had said people need a voice before they need a sandwich. There were handmade scarves from a local knitting circle. Soup from Hank's truck parked out back with his signature, no questions, just food sign. Trina's kid was chasing a balloon across the floor while Trina herself stood near the check-in table organizing with military precision. Zane manned the shelter resource board, handing out flyers and talking quietly with a young man who hadn't made eye contact in 10 minutes but hadn't walked away either. Marissa arrived mid-morning, flanked by 2 investors and a city council member. But she wore jeans, not heels, and she didn't stay near the cameras. She found Jake by the coffee stand. This was never just a coat drive, she said. Jake smiled, stirring cream into a paper cup. No, it's a reminder of what that people remember who showed up. Marissa watched as a little girl wrapped a too big scarf around her mother's neck, both giggling like they'd never seen snow before. Then her eyes turned back to Jake. And who made them feel like they mattered. Midday, a moment of quiet passed. The line outside had shortened. Volunteers rotated to rest. Jake stepped out for air and found himself near the back alley where a bundled-up teen stood smoking nervously. "Hey," Jake said gently. "You all right?" The boy startled, dropping the cigarette. "I wasn't stealing anything, I swear." Jake raised his hands. "Didn't say you were." The kid looked about 15 too thin for the oversized hoodie he wore. He kept glancing toward the parking lot like he might bolt. "You hungry?" Jake asked. "No handouts," the boy muttered. Jake nodded. "Fair. I'm not offering one. I'm offering a job." The teen blinked. What kind of job? Jake reached into his coat pocket and handed him a flyer. "Tomorrow morning. Warehouse help. Sorting coats and supplies, pays hourly. No ID needed the first week. We'll help you get that later." The boy stared at the flyer like it might vanish. Jake added, "You show up, I'll make sure there's a hot breakfast." The teen's voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" Jake thought for a moment. "Because once I was standing in the rain and someone gave me something when I didn't ask. I didn't earn it, but I didn't forget it either." The kid didn't answer, just shoved the flyer in his pocket and walked away fast. Jake didn't follow. He knew sometimes it took more than one offer to land. By late afternoon, the conversation table had drawn its own crowd. Former clients turned storytellers, people sharing the moment they felt seen again. One man spoke about a coat he was given 5 years ago. A woman described how a single kind word in a bus station stopped her from stepping in front of traffic. A volunteer wrote their stories on index cards and clipped them to a string near the exit. By the end of the day, it stretched from one wall to the other. Jake stood beneath it, reading the names and moments strung like lights. Then he saw it. A card, written in shaky penmanship. "He gave me a coat under a streetlight. Didn't ask for my name. Just said, 'Pass it forward.' I did. And now he's here doing it again. M.L." His throat tightened. He didn't need to turn around to know she was standing behind him. "I didn't want to frame that one," Marissa said softly. "It needed to stay here, with the others." He turned. She wore the same soft expression she had the day she'd told him the truth, but something in her gaze was different now, less guarded, more open. "People keep thanking me today," Jake murmured, "but all I did was show up." Marissa shook her head. "No, Jake. You stayed. That's harder." A pause, then she reached into her pocket and held out something small, an envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of a younger Marissa, sitting under that streetlight, coat wrapped tight, face pale and drawn, but her eyes already showing the beginning of fight. Jake stared at it. "Someone at the gas station took that," she said. "Security footage, I think. They gave me a copy later. I never knew what to do with it." Jake held the photo carefully reverently. Now he did. "I want to frame this," he said. "Put it next to the very first coat we distribute next winter." She smiled. "Then let me write the caption." They stood quietly for a while, the laughter of children and the hum of purpose behind them. Then Marissa took his hand. "Come with me," she said. "To where?" "To see how far this thing can go." Jake didn't hesitate. Because in that moment, surrounded by stories and scarves and second chances, he understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Love doesn't always begin with a kiss. Sometimes it begins with a coat. 1 year later, the streetlight still stood where it always had. Tucked behind the old gas station off Highway 22, it flickered like a stubborn heartbeat against the night, casting its familiar circle of amber onto cracked concrete and wind-blown leaves. Most drivers passed it without noticing, just another forgotten corner of the city. But not tonight. Jake parked a little farther down the road, engine ticking as it cooled in the crisp December air. The heater had barely worked on the drive, but he didn't mind. Emma sat beside him now, 7, wrapped in a puffy blue coat and a knit scarf that had warmth lines stitched in pink across the edge. She bounced her legs as she peered through the windshield. "Is this it?" she asked. Jake smiled. "This is it." He got out, walked around to help her down, and they approached the streetlight together, father and daughter, past and future. Emma clutched a small brown package wrapped in twine. "What do you think it'll look like?" she whispered. Jake looked around. Quiet, but important. At the center of the circle of light, someone had placed a new bench. Wooden. Simple. With a plaque bolted into its backrest. Emma ran ahead and knelt beside it, reading aloud, dedicated to the strangers who gave warmth without needing names. "Pass it forward." Jake felt his throat tighten. He sat beside her, gazing up at the light. "You sat here, didn't you?" Emma asked. "No," Jake said softly. "She did." Emma tilted her head. "Miss Marissa." He nodded. "Before she was CEO. Before she was anything, really. Just a girl having the worst night of her life." Emma fell quiet, then said, "And you gave her your coat." Jake chuckled. "I gave her a coat. I didn't know who she was. I just saw someone who needed to not feel alone." Emma looked up, "Like how you saw me when Mom got sick." Jake turned to her, eyes soft. "Yeah, just like that." She laid the package on the bench. "Should we leave it?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Emma smiled proudly. "It's a coat. My favorite. It still fits, but I want someone else to be warm." Jake reached over and squeezed her hand, words failing him. She leaned her head against his arm. Above them, snow began to fall, not heavy but gently, like the sky was blessing the earth one flake at a time. Earlier that day, the Warmth Line team had finished their final winter shipment. Over 3,000 coats, hundreds of blankets, hygiene kits, and care packages sent across the state. The team had grown. Luis now trained new outreach coordinators. Trina had launched a program for single moms in transition. Zane mentored teens with stories not unlike his own. And Jake had become the kind of leader he never meant to be, but exactly the one people needed, steady listening, never too busy to show up. The coat Marissa once kept was now displayed in the Warmth Line headquarters behind glass with a simple sign, "The coat that started it all." But everyone knew it wasn't the fabric that made it sacred. It was the act. The choice to give when no one was watching. The belief that kindness matters even when you never see what comes of it. Back at the streetlight, Emma stood and brushed snow from her sleeves. "Do you think someone will find it tonight?" she asked, nodding to the package on the bench. Jake looked around. A car slowed in the distance. The world felt still but full of movement just beneath the surface, like compassion waiting for a chance. "I think someone already has," he said. They walked back to the truck in silence, their footprints trailing behind them like breadcrumbs for the next heart to follow. Jake opened the passenger door for her, then paused. From the corner of his eye, he saw someone stepping into the light. A woman, wrapped in a thin sweater, hands tucked deep in her pockets. She stared at the bench, then slowly sat, fingers brushing the twine on the package. Emma looked too. Jake didn't say a word. They just watched as the woman untied the twine and lifted the coat into her arms. She pressed it to her chest, eyes closed as snow landed softly on her shoulders. Daddy Emma whispered, "Look." The streetlight, flickering just seconds ago, burned steady now. Brighter. Almost warm. Jake smiled. "Let's go home," he said. That night, in a small apartment where love hung on every wall and warmth came from more than heaters, Jake tucked Emma into bed and sat beside her a while longer. She reached up sleepily. "Did I do good today?" He nodded, voice thick. "You did beautifully." As her breaths slowed, he sat still, staring out the window at the glowing city skyline. In his heart, he carried no medals, no fortune, no fame. Just a moment, a coat, a light, and the quiet, unshakable belief that sometimes the smallest thing you give becomes the biggest thing someone remembers. Where are you watching from? We love hearing from viewers all over the world. Drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from and what part of the story touched you most. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another story filled with heart, hope, and humanity. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep passing it forward.